Hello and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you to our ongoing leadership podcast series. Thanks for joining me today. Before we get into the podcast proper and outline the background of our guest today, I'd just like to thank again Sydney Fish Markets for their support. So today's podcast guest has a very interesting background. He was self-employed for 17 years in the homewares and furniture sector of the economy. He has worked and looks like continue to be working as a deputy coordinator at My Community Legal Incorporated and is currently on a work placement with Salerno Law. And to top all that off, he is currently a student doing a double degree in law and business through Griffith University. So can I welcome to the podcast, Mark Jackway. How are you, Mark?
Yeah, good, Eric. Thanks for having me this evening, mate. Good to see you.
Mate, not a drama. Thank you for joining me. And so let's get to the podcast questions, and I'll start where I've started with all of my previous guests, and that is to say, in which industry was your first leadership role, and why did you take that on?
Well, Eric, my first leadership role was in the retail industry, and I commenced this when I purchased my own homeware store. I had some previous experience in support management, but that was pretty fleeting. That was at Woolworths. I was the second in command of the seafood department. And now that was a tough learning curve. I had to wake up at 4 a.m., drive to work and hand shovel ice while playing with prawns and sweet smelling fish. So it wasn't ideal, but I valued every moment of that employment. So that was not my first job, but it was an important one. This told me how to be self-reliant, how to manage a department and consider internal processes, which were interrelated between other departments. So being that, there were other people involved in the process, I quickly came to understand how important it was to connect with other people. That connectivity made it easier to learn new processes, which were not really taught and could not be found, in like the section briefs and whatnot that those departments have. So I listened to what the other department managers told me, considered how they led their team. So it was pretty obvious which departments were performing better, and I noticed a few things. Some department managers, the department managers that were more open and approachable seemed to have a happier and healthier working environment. And so they took part of the process, got their hands a bit dirty, and came to know their employees and made the everyday workplace just a better place to be. So it was beneficial to the company as well, because it led to a greater retention rate of the staff, led to a higher rate of staff availability and less sick days and whatnot. And that's extremely important for staff retention and having a good, thriving workplace. Because the leadership was inclusive, everyone thrived. The hard goals were realised, and the amount the departments netted was on average higher than the other departments. So I reflected on those interactions and quickly attempted to adapt greater focus on human resource management skills in my own leadership role as a second in command. It was a minor role, but I took it on board pretty well. So there's a food chain there, but a good leader knows that and understands. And in order to create a working environment that's transparent and self-managed, each team member needs to be given some sort of authority and sense of purpose. You need strategic objectives, which require the people, they're the main asset of the organization, to be linked to the areas of management where employees need to be addressed and, realign with the organization. So, you've got to give this a pretty wide consideration. There's all different needs for people, psychological needs, basic needs. And if you're working in an environment you think you're inclusive with, and that's going to provide for you socially as well as boost your self-esteem, and you meet friends and be positive in that workplace and be recognized, then people are going to work harder. It's a self-worth and pride, and we're people, and that's what we resonate with, and that's what we do. So a good manager, I think, will understand this and come to the realization that, hey, we are actually at work for a majority of the time, and these people need to be included and have self-worth. So for me, that's what my first leadership role taught me. And that's what I brought to my role in that retail industry. I think that wraps up that question for me, mate.
Yeah, mate, no worries. That's a very good tie-in to and segue to the next question, actually. In your travels, Mark, have you found that there's a difference between the leadership and management function? Because you alluded to the management function towards the end of your answer there, and I'm interested to see in your experience, have you found a difference between the two?
Now, I believe there is a difference, but there's also a connectivity. So things are tied together. Leadership comes in many different forms, and the purpose of the leader is to mainly influence the staff to achieve the organisational goals of the company. So leaders, they've got the ability to lead by example, have the motivation, and have clear direction and vision. Some leaders are transactional and conduct themselves with more authority and issue tasks with more narrow compliance. I never felt like I was that sort of leader. I felt I was more of a transformational leader. I prefer to be more inclusive and develop an understanding of who my staff was, understand their needs, and also get to know their key strengths. So I focus on team building, encourage cross-communication, and more of a holistic workplace. I felt that to have a good notion of the organisational behaviour that was present within the environment would give a greater understanding of what was required in a leading role. If you simply delegated, or I believed that if I simply delegated, well, how would I possibly receive any feedback and inclusion? As I said, the greatest assets of the organisation, the employees. So I guess that's where the management interacts with the leadership side. A good manager is a person who depends on their skill sets and applies it to the necessary areas required. Their conceptual skills will be valuable as they resonate considerably more with the environment and understand which goals should be assigned to which person. As I was an owner-operator of the business for 11 years, as you introduced, and I didn't have the luxury of going on long holidays and leave the running of the business to a manager. I had a blend of a sense of motivation and direction, and that's they're the skills as well. When you're an owner-operator, it coincides with management. You need to be able to manage effectively and efficiently. So I did get strained at times, especially when I was working a 2 week on, 2 week off roster at the mines, and had to manage my business remotely, retain productivity and a sense of purpose when I returned. And I guess situations like these make a good leader. Some people may find life a little hard at times and change direction, but a good leader and manager, embraces the situation, needs to take lead and develop a strategy to, get that team through tough times. Yeah.
Yeah, that I guess from a small business perspective, managing your own business as an owner operator, you would tread that fine line between managing the place and leading the place, and
yes,
made that distinction fairly clear. So thank you for that. So segueing into the next question, leaders sometimes make mistakes. How do you engage with an error or mistake that's attributed to your leadership, Mark?
Well, I recall the time where I negotiated a lease for a larger premise. So it was an stressful time, which included me moving my business and my personal life fully interstate. I had new staff. Well, I'd come from a scenario being set up on the coast for 5 years, and I had a few stores and everything was rolling well. So this was a total new situation for me. So I was moving everything, picking it up and starting again in a new scenario. So as I had new staff, I felt the need to micromanage a lot of the processes which once before had been easily done by structured staff. So this led to me being burnt out, heaps of stress, and the staff were not real happy. So I don't know when I realised that I had merged into more of that transactional leader role, but I think it's probably at the time where I was pretty exhausted and I just couldn't think straight. So when that realization occurred, I took ownership of the error. I spoke to the staff and, humbly advised them that I've been applying my leadership in a manner which was incorrect, and that things were going to change. And they did change. I started giving more authority to the staff. And as before, when I had my other stores on the coast, it was a more proactive workplace and definitely more stability. So when you make an error, you just address it immediately. If you let it continue, it's just going to manifest and get a bit bigger, and it won't be easily remedied. So, people make mistakes, and other people learn from this. So you just suck it up and move on, pretty much. Yeah, but that's a big one. Yeah.
That's a good way to conclude that. And I guess there's always a difficulty that when you've got to get to the point where you've admit an error or have to change something that you've done, it sounds like you did a bit of a lot of introspection about the kind of leader that you were at the time. And that's always a difficult thing, because we try and see ourselves as the best self we can, and sometimes that's not exactly what other people are seeing. And it leads quite nicely into the next question about what is the most difficult part about being a leader. I mean, you've packed a couple of things. One of them I heard was maybe some getting balance around the work-life stuff. Is that fair comment, Mark?
Yeah, definitely. Work-life balance is very hard, especially when you're running your own business. It's extremely hands-on. So it's not like a 9 to 5 where you can disconnect at the end of the day. And I mean, it's exactly what you're doing as well for yourself. You're trying to strive to create something new and something different. So you've always got that hands-on approach, and it never actually switches off. It's a continuous little grind that's even when you're having a doze or having a chill out on the weekend. It's always there and it's always going. So that's a very fair comment. But I think for me, one of the hardest things of being a leader is especially when you're in charge of a situation and owner operator of a business, or any business, small, medium or large, is the fact that people are reliant on you. So their whole livelihoods are resting on your shoulders, and if you don't perform a task suitable enough to create something successful in the chosen business environment, in that chosen market, it'll fail and those people could lose everything. So for me, that's the most difficult part of a leader. And as you said, what we were talking about before, it's something that you can't disconnect from, you can't switch off.
How do you measure your success as a leader, Mark?
For me, my major success as a leader is being a father. I attempt to lead my beautiful little girl, who's 9 years old now, by example, and show her that life is a place of many hurdles and obstacles that you will ultimately pass if you just keep on going. So she's an amazing person. She inspires me every day, and she's my number one energizer. So and personally, on top of that, I'm nearing the completion of a double degree in law and business, as you said, and have a placement with an outstanding law firm. And for me, this is a new direction. As a future lawyer, I must focus on my leadership success in a different way. So I'm re-navigating everything. What I've learned, I'm applying it to a new situation. I've got some business ideas as well. I'm starting to, it's a small business. I'll be selling apparel, so just an online gig. And for me, that's success as well. It hasn't launched yet, but it's the little bits and pieces that add up to that. So it's measured against different issues in different environments and dependent on who the person is. So I'll navigate through and strive as I did, and you just adjust. You adjust to the scenario, and if you can adjust well, that's how I measure success as a leader. And if somebody can do that, that's a great thing, and that's an inspirational thing to see.
Yeah, I fully agree. So let me take you to a couple of statements that I've asked podcast guests in the past, and just want to get your perspective on some of these, if I can, Mark. So first one being on-the-job experience develops better leaders.
Job experience and placement is extremely important. I'll go one further and say it's impossible to develop a leader without on-the-job experience. A leader needs to resonate with their environment. If they're blind to that environment, they won't develop the key skills that are needed to apply to any given situation. So sense of direction won't be attainable, and the potential leader, they'll respond incorrectly. They won't have any direction. So it'd be sort of like jumping in a tank without a navigational system. You'd end up in a ditch. So yeah, definitely on the job experience is a must-have.
So here's a question that I'm very interested in. Someone who's gone back into academia, and you're studying your double degree. Formal education helps to develop better leaders.
Oh mate, yeah, that's that's a tricky one, because once again, it's just dependent on the person, isn't it? Because so many leaders are self-made, and they've done it out of motivation and determination. But as a person who's more recently educated, I understand how education can benefit a person and what it can help you to achieve. And some pathways can only be accessible via education, and that's like my current situation, and like my ambitions of becoming a lawyer. I wouldn't be able to do that without a formal education. That's not to say that I believe formal education makes a better leader and or helps develop a better leader, but it's the given person. It depends how they will use that formal education and how they'll apply it. So it's up to them. It's up to the person to decide if they can or will apply in education to their current or future leadership role. And so many people get by without one. There's so many leaders that have become amazing leaders and smashed massive goals. So it's important. It's important, but it's not important. So it's just dependent.
Sure, and that what you've just said then, Mark, is exactly what I've been hearing consistently on the podcast. But let me, if you'll allow me, let me unpack some of this, because your background is exceedingly interesting to me, in that you were an entrepreneurial type of person. You ran your own business, and then at some point you've decided, right, I want to pursue another goal I've got, which is to be a lawyer. And yeah, you can't escape the fact that you need formal qualifications to enter into law.
That's it.
So previous podcast guests have used the term that formal education just provides a bigger leadership toolbox for them into the future. So do you see that in your pathway to getting education, that these skills that you've developed through your legal studies and also your business studies, that they've equipped you with a new set of tools that you didn't have before?
Equipped me with fundamentals needed to be applied to that given role. This doesn't necessarily trend to leadership. What trends to leadership is how the person is going to use that information and apply it to the given situation. And that resonates, as I just said, with the person. That education is not determinant on being a leader, but it can open up ideas of how to apply your leadership to that given sector, that given marketplace.
Yep.
But saying that, if a person didn't have leadership skills, then a business degree, a law degree would definitely open up some avenues which would help them be provided with the necessary toolkit to use.
Fully agree, mate. Here's the last statement. This one I'm very interested to hear your response, as with every podcast guest. Leaders are born, not made.
So many people have attributes which scream leadership, and they'll have that direction, and then they'll get some education, and this will help develop their leadership skills. And some people don't require any additional help and find themselves in a leadership role for their entire lives. And some people need more direction, and education Growing up in a small business environment, I've seen and met so many different business owners in so many different fields. Now going through uni and going through, I've had work placement in 3 different firms now, racked up nearly 1,000 hours of workplace experience. And there are so many, attributes which I see in people that, are still at uni or are lawyers, or, it's just different. It's just different for everyone. And so you can be made into a leader. You've got to be inspired by people as well. So surround yourself with people who are pumped and getting there and want to achieve the same thing. And I think you're going to pick up some tidbits that are going to help you. So
it's an extremely adaptive way to look at the world of leadership, because you can always learn something from somebody, even if they're not doing what you think is right. So you learn from people's mistakes, or you learn from bad leaders. I've worked in my early career with some very out there, not great leaders, but I learnt more from them than I did ones that you might think are more perfect leaders, and perfect's probably not the right word, but very good leaders that you need to see where the potential roadblocks are to good leadership and what you would do that someone else might not do. So yeah, I agree. And this is one of the beauties about doing this podcast is an issue that you've brought up, and one that I haven't really thought about, is that each individual brings something unique to this discussion around what leadership is. And some people will never want to take on the burden of leadership for the reasons you said before, that if you're an entrepreneurial type and you've got a business and people are relying on you for their income, that's a lot of pressure, and people don't sometimes think about that. And for myself, I've only ever worked for other people. I've run small businesses when I was at uni, but nothing to the extent that you've done. But I guess having the burden of people relying on you to have that business be viable would probably put a lot of pressure on it. I don't think I could handle it.
That is the main pressure. It really is. But as I said before, it makes you push harder. You've got that responsibility, and you need to take ownership of it, because you can't let those people down. You don't want to let those people down. You don't want to be that person that has let those people down. So yeah, it does. It wakes you up in the morning. It's like an extra shot of coffee, and it gets you running.
Sure.
It's a good thing. You need to feel positive about it. And, people say, I'm stressed out, but what I say is, well, I've got a lot on my plate. I'd rather be busier than bored. So it's going to be another good day. So let's get into it.
Oh, excellent. That's great. Mark, here's a couple of questions I've got around some study that I'm doing, and I'm looking at strategic thinking and foresight as being some of the most, but not the most, to the exclusion of everything else, very critical leadership capabilities. So what, from your perspective in the world of leadership that you've tread through, what are your thoughts on strategic thinking and foresight as leader capabilities?
I mean, they're definitely 2 critical leadership capabilities, which future leaders must have. So a good leader will be able to adapt their own value chain in order to analyse a systemic way of their organisation is performing its most valid activities, and this will let them understand the way it interacts with those activities. So the relationship with that value chain and these activities, that will expose the key indicators, and that'll lead to things like sustaining competitive advantage in the marketplace. This is my education I'm pulling on right now. So do uni terminologies for the business buffs.
Yeah.
So as I explained before, you've got to have empathy. All right, you've got to have empathy and conceptual skills. So.
Sure, no, that's great. Look, Mark, the final question, this is one that I ask everybody, and I know you've alluded to some of what might be your response here, but what would you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
Okay, I did think about this question a lot, so I went through it and I mulled over it. And yeah, that's personal, and it gets back to a lot of reflection because, geez, when you look back on yourself, I don't know about you, but I stuffed up a lot. So yeah, What I tell myself now is to remain a bit more calm. I've ridden heaps of ups and downs, and the only thing I learned, and it's the one thing I tell my daughter time and time again, if the situation seems tough, but it'll always pass. So just you just got to keep walking forward, and you'll get where you are meant to be. To be an effective leader doesn't mean to be the most energetic leader, or the leader who is most versed, or the leader who is most successful. It's the leader who will continue to apply themselves consistently in a positive manner for the good of the people and for themselves. So, yeah.
That is a fantastic way to conclude the podcast. So for those listening, I've been speaking this evening with Mark Jackway. Mark, thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. It's good to be on, mate, and thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
Not a worry, mate. Look, for those listening, again, this has been Talking Leadership. Thank you for joining us, and more great content to come in the next weeks and months. I will catch you all on the next podcast.